It all started on a bright, sunny afternoon in a quiet little neighborhood. The kind of place where kids ride bikes, dogs bark at squirrels, and everyone knows each other at least a little bit. Birds chirped in the trees, and the air smelled like fresh grass. That's where we meet Jake. Jake was just a regular guy, the kind of person you'd wave to and not think twice about. He wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't have a big car or a fancy house. Nope, Jake was simple. He liked quiet days, cold lemonade, and his backyard. That backyard was his happy place. He'd sit out there with a book or just watch the sky, letting the world go by. A few weeks ago, Jake did something small but special. He put up a bird bath in his yard. It wasn't a big deal, not to him, anyway. It was just a little round thing made of stone, with a shallow spot for water. He filled it up, and soon, birds started coming. Little ones with bright feathers, hopping around, splashing in the water. Jake loved it. He'd smile every time a bird landed, like it was his own little show. Most people in the neighborhood didn't even notice the bird bath. It was tucked in a corner near some bushes, out of the way. If you walked by, you might miss it completely. And that was fine with Jake. He didn't need anyone to care. But someone did notice. Her name was Linda. Oh boy, Linda was something else. Around here, people called her the HOA Queen. HOA stands for Homeowners Association. It's a group that makes rules about how your house and yard should look. Linda was the boss of it, or at least she acted like she was. Jake had a different name for her, though. He called her HOA Karen. Why? Because she was always complaining, always pointing out what was wrong. If your grass was too long, Linda knew. If your mailbox was a tiny bit crooked, Linda saw it. She'd march around with her clipboard, writing things down, her face all scrunched up like she'd just smelled something bad. She had short hair, a loud voice, and a frown that never went away. Everyone knew Linda loved rules more than anything else in the world. Rules were her best friends. See, Linda's house was perfect. Her grass was always cut just right. Her flowers stood in straight lines, like soldiers. She even painted her fence every year so it wouldn't chip. If you broke one of her precious rules, watch out. She'd knock on your door with that clipboard and tell you exactly what you did wrong. Most people just nodded and fixed whatever she complained about. It was easier that way. Nobody wanted to argue with Linda. She'd talk your ear off until you gave up. So, when Linda spotted Jake's bird bath, you can bet she didn't like it. To her, it wasn't just a little spot for birds. Nope, it was trouble. It was something new, something she didn't control. And Linda hated that. The first time she saw it, she stopped dead in her tracks. She stood there on the sidewalk, staring at Jake's yard, her eyes squinting like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Jake was out on his porch that day, sipping lemonade, watching the birds. He saw her looking but didn't say anything. He figured she'd move on. Most people did. But Linda wasn't most people. Hey, Jake, she called out, her voice sharp like a teacher catching you chewing gum in class. Jake looked up, surprised. What's that thing in your yard? She asked, pointing at the bird bath like it was a monster. Jake shrugged. It's a bird bath, he said, nice and calm. For the birds. Linda's frown got deeper. Did you ask the HOA about it? She snapped. Jake shook his head. Didn't think I had to, he said. It's not hurting anyone. Linda huffed, like that was the dumbest thing she'd ever heard. She scribbled something on her clipboard, turned around, and marched off. Jake just watched her go, sipping his lemonade. He wasn't worried. Not yet. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets good. Jake wasn't just some guy with a bird bath. Oh no. He had a secret. A big one. Nobody in the neighborhood had a clue, not Linda, not the old lady across the street, not even the kids who played soccer in the cul-de-sac. Jake looked normal on the outside. He wore plain shirts and old sneakers. He mowed his lawn and took out his trash like everyone else. But deep down, Jake was hiding something huge. Something that would flip this whole story upside down. And Linda? She was about to find out the hard way. She thought she was the smart one, the one in charge. She had no idea what was coming. That sunny afternoon, everything seemed peaceful. The birds splashed in the water. Jake leaned back in his chair. Linda stomped back to her perfect house, already planning her next move. It was just the start of something wild, something that would make the whole neighborhood talk for weeks. But we're not there yet. Oh no, we're just getting warmed up. The real fun was still ahead, and it was going to be a doozy. So, here's a question for you: what would you do if someone got mad about something as silly as a bird bath? Imagine it, you put up something small, something you like, and your neighbor loses their mind over it. Would you laugh? Would you argue? Would you just ignore them? Drop your answer below, I'd love to hear it. And while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from today. Are you on your couch? At school? Maybe outside like Jake? Let me know. See, this story's about more than just a bird bath. It's about Jake, Linda, and a secret that's going to shake things up. Linda thought she could boss Jake around. She thought she knew everything. But Jake? He was quiet for a reason. He wasn't scared of her clipboard or her rules. He had something up his sleeve, something Linda never saw coming. What was it? Well, you'll have to stick around to find out. This neighborhood was about to get a big surprise, and it all started with that little bird bath in Jake's yard. The sun kept shining that day, and the birds kept splashing. Jake finished his lemonade and set the glass down. Linda disappeared into her house, probably writing a long list of complaints. Everything looked normal. But it wasn't. Not even close. Something big was brewing, and it was going to hit like a storm. Linda thought she was the hunter, chasing down rule breakers with her clipboard. But Jake? He was the one watching, waiting, ready to turn the tables. And when he did, oh boy, it was going to be good. So, stick with me, because this story's just beginning. We've got Jake, the quiet guy with a bird bath. We've got Linda, the HOA queen with her frowny face and her rules. And we've got a secret that's going to make your jaw drop. What happens next? You'll see soon. For now, think about that question: what would you do if someone called the cops on something as tiny as a bird bath? Let me know below, and let's keep this ride going. One day, things got loud in Jake's quiet little neighborhood. The sun was still shining, the birds were still splashing in his bird bath, but trouble was coming. It was Linda, yep, the HOA queen herself. She stormed over to Jake's yard like a bull charging at a red flag. Her face was redder than a ripe tomato, all scrunched up and mad. She stopped right in front of the bird bath, her hands on her hips, and pointed at it like it was the worst thing she'd ever seen. That bird bath is against HOA rules, she barked, her voice loud and sharp, like a dog yelling at a mailman. Jake was sitting on his porch, rocking in his chair, holding a cold glass of lemonade. He looked up at her, calm as could be, and gave a little smile. "It's not hurting anyone, Linda," he said, nice and easy. His voice was soft, like he didn't have a worry in the world. But Linda? Oh, she wasn't having it? Not one bit. Her eyes got big, and her mouth turned into a tight line. She grabbed her clipboard, that thing she carried everywhere like a shield, and started scribbling fast. The pen scratched loud against the paper, like she was writing a note to send Jake to jail. "Standards," she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. "This neighborhood has standards." Then she huffed, turned on her heel, and marched off, her shoes clicking on the sidewalk. Jake watched her go, still smiling a little. He took a sip of his lemonade and shrugged his shoulders. Linda had been a pain before. She'd complained about his trash cans once, saying they were too close to the curb. Another time, she told him his mailbox needed a new coat of paint. Jake didn't care much. He'd nod, fix it if he felt like it, and move on. Linda's nonsense was just noise to him, like a fly buzzing around that you swat away. He figured this bird bath thing would blow over, too. After all, it was just a little stone bowl with water. What's the big deal? But here's where it gets wild. Linda wasn't done. Not even close. Jake didn't know it yet, but she was already cooking up something bigger. See, while Jake sat there on his porch, sipping his drink and watching the birds, Linda was back at her house, pacing around. Her perfect little house with its perfect little flowers and its perfect little fence. She grabbed her phone, her fingers moving fast, and dialed 911. Yep, you heard that right, 911. The number you call for emergencies, like if your house is on fire or a robber's breaking in. But Linda? She wasn't calling about a fire or a thief. She was calling about Jake's bird bath. "Hello, yes, this is Linda Grayson," she said into the phone, her voice all serious. "There's an illegal structure in my neighbor's yard. It's breaking HOA rules, and it needs to be stopped." The operator on the other end probably blinked a few times, confused. An illegal structure? Most people would think of something big, like a shed or a tower. But nope, Linda meant that tiny bird bath, sitting there with a couple of sparrows splashing around. Crazy, right? Who calls the cops over something like that? Linda, that's who. She hung up the phone, crossed her arms, and nodded to herself, like she'd just saved the world. Meanwhile, Jake had no idea what was coming. He swapped his lemonade for a cup of coffee black, no sugar, just how he liked it. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking a little, and kept his eyes on the street. From his porch, he could see Linda's house down the block. He saw her storming around earlier, waving her arms like a mad chicken, but now she was out of sight. He didn't think much of it. She'd yelled before. She'd complained before. This was just Linda being Linda, he thought. He took another sip of his coffee, the steam curling up in the air, and watched a little bird hop onto the edge of the bath. It dipped its beak in the water, and Jake grinned. "See," he said to himself. "Not hurting a soul." But Linda's rant wasn't over. Jake didn't hear her on the phone, didn't know she'd called the police. He couldn't see her standing by her window, peeking out through the curtains, waiting for something to happen. She was sure the cops would roll up, lights flashing, and make Jake take that bird bath down. She pictured him standing there, embarrassed, while she stood on her porch with her clipboard, victorious. That's what Linda wanted: control. She liked being the boss, telling everyone what to do. And Jake? To her, he was just a guy who didn't follow the rules. A troublemaker. She didn't like troublemakers. Here's the thing, though, Jake wasn't worried. Not one bit. He sat there, calm and cool, while Linda plotted and fussed. He didn't yell back at her. He didn't march over to her house to argue. He just stayed put, drinking his coffee, watching the world go by. But if you looked real close, you'd see something. His eyes. They weren't sleepy or bored. They were sharp, like a hawk watching its prey. Jake didn't say much, but he saw things. He noticed stuff. And deep down, he knew something Linda didn't. Something big. Something that would turn this whole mess upside down. Linda thought she had the upper hand. She thought calling 911 was her big win. She didn't know Jake wasn't just some guy with a bird bath. He wasn't scared of her clipboard or her loud voice. He'd dealt with worse, way worse than an angry neighbor with a phone. But he didn't let on. He didn't brag or shout or give her a hint. He just sat there, quiet, letting her dig her own hole. And boy, was she digging fast. The tension was building, even if Jake didn't show it. Linda's face stayed red, her mind racing with plans. She was sure she'd get her way. Jake's bird bath would be gone, and she'd be the queen of the neighborhood again. That's what she thought. But Jake? He kept sipping his coffee, his eyes flicking to her house every now and then. He didn't say a word, but he was ready. Ready for what? Well, that's the fun part, we're not there yet. Days went by after Linda's big blow-up about the bird bath, and things didn't calm down, not even a little. The sun kept shining, the birds kept splashing, but Linda? She was like a storm that wouldn't quit. Every single day, she'd march past Jake's house, her shoes stomping on the sidewalk, her eyes locked on that bird bath. She'd stop, cross her arms, and glare at it like it had insulted her whole family. Her face would scrunch up, her lips tight, like she'd just bitten into a sour lemon. To Linda, that little stone bowl wasn't just a bird bath, it was her enemy. She hated it more than anything. Jake saw her every time. He'd be out on his porch, maybe with a cup of coffee or just sitting there, watching the world go by. Linda's glares didn't scare him. He'd just nod or wave a little, nice and polite, like nothing was wrong. But Linda wasn't done with him. Oh no. She started leaving notes, mean ones. She'd sneak up to his mailbox when she thought he wasn't looking and stuff them inside. The notes were written in big, angry letters. "Remove that bird bath or face the consequences," one said. Another read, "This is your last warning." Jake would find them, pull them out, and read them with a tiny smile. Then plop, they'd go right in the trash. He didn't argue. He didn't write back. He just tossed them away and went about his day, like Linda's words were nothing more than a buzzing fly. Linda thought she was winning. She thought Jake was scared or lazy, just letting her boss him around. She'd march back to her perfect house, her clipboard under her arm, feeling big and strong. She was sure that birdbath would be gone soon. After all, she'd called 911. The cops were coming, right? She'd sit by her window, peeking out, waiting for sirens. She wanted to see Jake standing there, embarrassed, taking that birdbath down while she watched with a smirk. That's what Linda dreamed about. She thought she was the queen of the neighborhood, the one who made the rules and made everyone follow them. But here's where it gets good, really good. Jake wasn't just sitting there doing nothing. Nope. While Linda stomped and glared and wrote her nasty notes, Jake started noticing things. Little things. Strange things. Things that didn't add up. He didn't say a word about it, not to Linda, not to anyone, but his eyes were sharp, and his brain was busy. See, Jake liked watching. He liked paying attention. And the more he watched Linda, the more he saw stuff that made him go, huh, that's weird. First, there was her garage door. Jake's porch faced the street, and he could see Linda's house from where he sat. Most nights, everything was quiet. Houses were dark, lights were off, everyone was asleep. But Linda's garage? It was different. Late at night, way past bedtime, that garage door would be cracked open. Not all the way, just a little, like someone didn't want it to squeak too loud. Jake would sip his coffee or his lemonade, rocking in his chair, and he'd see it. A sliver of light would sneak out from under the door, faint but there. Why was it open? What was she doing in there? It wasn't normal, that's for sure. Most people shut their garages tight at night. Not Linda. Then, there was something even stranger. Sometimes, Jake would spot her sneaking out. Not during the day, when she'd march around with her clipboard like a boss. No, this was late, when the moon was up and the street was empty. Linda would creep out her back door, quiet as a mouse, carrying big black bags. They looked heavy, like they were stuffed full. She'd glance around, left and right, making sure no one was watching. Then she'd hurry to her car, pop the trunk, and toss those bags inside. Slam the trunk would shut, and she'd dart back into her house like nothing happened. Jake saw it all. Not every night, but enough times to make him wonder. What was in those bags? Trash. Clothes. Something else? It was weird, super weird. Jake didn't run over and ask her. He didn't call her out or tell the neighbors. He just kept watching, quiet as ever. Every time Linda glared at his birdbath, every time she left a note, he'd nod and smile, but in his head, he was adding things up. The open garage door. The black bags. The way she'd sneak around like a cat in the dark. Little details, like puzzle pieces, were starting to fit together. He didn't know the whole picture yet, but he knew something was off. Linda wasn't just a nosy neighbor with too many rules. There was more to her, something she didn't want anyone to see. Linda had no idea Jake was onto her. She thought he was just some guy who liked birds, someone she could boss around. She'd strut past his house, huffing and puffing, sure she was in charge. That birdbath's days are numbered, she'd mutter to herself, imagining her big victory. But Jake? He wasn't worried about her notes or her glares. He was too busy watching her, figuring her out. Every sneaky trip to her car, every late-night garage crack, was another clue. He didn't say it out loud, but he was thinking, what are you up to, Linda? And here's a fun question for you, what do you think Jake saw? Those black bags, that open garage, what could Linda be hiding? Maybe it's something silly, like old socks she's too embarrassed to throw out. Or maybe it's something wild, like pirate treasure. Take a guess, drop it in the comments below. I'll tell you soon what it really was, but I want to hear your ideas first. What would you sneak around with in big black bags? Tell me. The days kept passing, and the tension kept growing. Linda got louder, more notes, more glares, more complaints. She even started knocking on other neighbors' doors, telling them, Jake's breaking the rules. We can't let this stand. She thought she was building an army to take down that birdbath. But Jake? He stayed calm, tossing her notes in the trash, sipping his coffee, watching her every move. He didn't fight back. He didn't need to, not yet. Linda thought she was the boss of the neighborhood, the one calling the shots. She had no clue Jake was onto her. No clue he was collecting those little hints, those sneaky moments, like a detective in a mystery book. Every glare she gave him, every note she wrote, just made him watch her closer. He was patient, quiet, waiting. Linda was sure she'd win this fight. But Jake? He was starting to see the real Linda, the one she hid from everyone. And when he figured it all out, oh boy, it was going to be big. Stick around, because this story's about to get even better. Then came the day everything exploded like a big, loud firework in the sky. Linda finally snapped. She'd been mad about Jake's bird bath for weeks, stomping around, leaving notes, calling 911 once already. But this time? She went all out. It was a sunny morning, the kind where the birds chirped extra loud and the air felt warm. Jake was inside his house, maybe making a sandwich or reading a book, when Linda grabbed her phone again. She dialed 911, her voice shaking with anger. "There's an intruder with that bird bath," she screamed into the phone. "Send help now. He's dangerous." An intruder? With a bird bath? It sounded crazy, even for Linda. She wasn't thinking straight, she just wanted Jake gone, and she'd say anything to make it happen. She slammed the phone down, her hands shaking, and peeked out her window, waiting. She was sure this was it, the big moment when the cops would come and drag Jake away. She could almost see it, Jake in trouble, the bird bath gone, and her standing tall as the neighborhood boss. She smirked to herself, thinking she'd won. Outside, Jake heard something. A wail in the distance, sirens. They started soft but got louder fast, like a fire truck racing closer. He put down whatever he was holding, maybe a glass of water, and stepped out onto his porch. The noise filled the street, bouncing off the houses. Jake squinted down the road, expecting to see some annoyed cops rolling up. Linda had called them before, after all, and he figured they'd just sigh and tell her to chill out. He wasn't worried, not yet. He stood there in his old sneakers and plain shirt, hands in his pockets, watching. Sure enough, 2 squad cars zoomed in. Their lights flashed red and blue, spinning like tops, and their tires squealed as they stopped right in front of Jake's house. The whole neighborhood woke up, curtains twitched, heads poked out of doors. This was big. Linda burst out of her house like a rocket, her face red and wild. She ran into the street, pointing at Jake like he was the worst bad guy ever. "That's him," she yelled, her voice so loud it cracked. "Arrest him. He's the intruder. Get him." She waved her arms, her clipboard tucked under one elbow, sure the cops would listen to her. Jake raised an eyebrow, still calm. He didn't move, just stood there on his porch, watching Linda lose her mind. The cops climbed out of their cars, 2 of them, tall and serious, with shiny badges and black boots. Linda kept pointing, bouncing on her feet, waiting for them to grab Jake. But here's where it gets wild, the cops didn't even look at him. Not a glance. Instead, they turned and walked straight toward Linda. Their boots thumped on the pavement, steady and slow, like they knew exactly what they were doing. "Linda Grayson," one cop said, his voice deep and firm. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs, the metal glinting in the sun. Linda froze. Her arm dropped, and her mouth fell open like a fish gasping for air. What's going on?" she stammered, her eyes darting around. She took a step back, clutching her clipboard like it could save her. The cops didn't stop. They kept coming, calm and sure, while Linda's face went from red to white in 2 seconds flat. That's when Jake moved. He stepped off his porch, walking down the steps slow and easy, a big grin spreading across his face. The neighbors watching from their windows leaned closer. Linda's eyes flicked to him, wide and confused. Jake stopped a few feet away, hands still in his pockets, and then he dropped the bombshell. "Oh, didn't I mention," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm not just your neighbor, Linda. I'm an undercover cop. And those late-night trash runs. We've been watching you for weeks." Boom. The street went silent. You could have heard a feather drop. Linda's jaw hit the ground, and her clipboard slipped out of her hand, clattering on the pavement. The cops nodded at Jake, like they'd known him all along. The neighbors gasped, some even peeked out their doors now, whispering to each other. Linda shook her head, fast and hard. "No, no, that's not true," she squeaked. But it was too late. The cop with the handcuffs stepped closer. "Hands behind your back, ma'am," he said, and the metal clicked as they snapped around her wrists. Turns out, Linda wasn't just an HOA tyrant with a loud voice and a love for rules. Nope, she'd been up to something bad. Really bad. All those nights Jake saw her sneaking out with big black bags. Those weren't trash runs. She'd been running a little side hustle, something illegal enough to get her in big trouble. Maybe she was stealing stuff and selling it, or hiding things she shouldn't have. Whatever it was against the law, and Jake knew it. He wasn't just some guy with a birdbath. He was an undercover cop, working quiet and smart, watching her every move. Linda had no clue. None. She thought Jake was just a regular guy she could boss around. That birdbath? It was just her excuse to mess with him, to feel like she was in charge. She'd yell about it, write notes, call 911, all because she didn't like him breaking her precious rules. But while she was busy hating that birdbath, Jake and the cops were closing in on her. They'd been tracking her for weeks, those late-night trips, those heavy bags, all of it. She thought she was the hunter, but Jake was the one waiting to catch her. The cop car's lights kept flashing, painting the street red and blue. Linda stood there, handcuffs on, her perfect world falling apart. "This is a mistake," she yelled, but her voice was weak now, like a balloon losing air. The cops didn't listen. They guided her toward the car, one on each side, while she twisted and squirmed. Jake just watched, his grin steady. The birdbath sat there in his yard, quiet and innocent, while the real trouble, Linda, was finally caught. The neighbors couldn't believe it. Old Mr. Thompson across the street dropped his coffee mug, and it shattered on his porch. Kids stopped kicking their soccer ball, staring with big eyes. Linda, the HOA queen, the one who bossed everyone around, was going to jail. And Jake? He wasn't just the quiet guy next door. He was a hero, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to show who he really was. Linda's screams faded as the cops pushed her into the back of the squad car. The door slammed shut, and the sirens started up again. Jake turned back to his house, stepping over Linda's dropped clipboard like it was nothing. The birdbath stayed right where it was, a little patch of water sparkling in the sun. Linda thought she'd win with her 911 calls and her rules. She had no idea the cops were already there for her. And Jake? He'd known it all along. This was the big reveal, and oh boy, it was a good one. The neighborhood turned super quiet as the cops took Linda away. The sirens faded, and the flashing lights disappeared down the street. Linda's clipboard, the one she always carried like a king's crown, fell out of her hands and hit the ground with a loud clack. It just lay there, all alone, while the cop car drove off with her in the back. Jake stood on his porch, arms crossed over his chest, watching it all happen. He didn't cheer or jump around. He just stood there, calm and steady, like he knew this was coming all along. Here's what really went down: those big black bags Linda kept sneaking out with. They weren't full of trash or old clothes. Nope. They were stuffed with stuff she'd been stealing. Little things from people's yards, stuff from stores, things she thought no one would miss. She'd take them, hide them in her garage, and then sell them to make some extra money. She was sneaky about it, doing it late at night when everyone was asleep. Linda thought she was so smart, that no one would ever catch her. But Jake did. He'd been watching her for months, keeping track of every move she made. He saw the bags, the late-night trips, everything. He waited for just the right moment to let the truth come out. The cops knew, too. Jake wasn't working alone, he'd been talking to them the whole time. They'd set it all up, waiting for Linda to mess up big enough to get caught. And when she called 911 about Jake's birdbath, screaming about an intruder, that was it. She handed them the perfect chance. They didn't come for Jake, they came for her. All that yelling about the birdbath was just noise. The real problem was Linda and her stealing. Jake had been patient, quiet, and smart, and now justice was happening right in front of everyone. The next day, things changed fast. A letter came in the mail from the HOA, the group Linda used to boss around. It was short and simple: Linda Grayson is no longer in charge. That's all it said. No more rules from her, no more clipboard, no more mean notes in mailboxes. People read it and smiled. Linda was gone, and the neighborhood felt lighter, like a big cloud had floated away. Jake's bird bath? It stayed right where it was, sitting pretty in his yard. The birds kept coming, splashing, and chirping, and no one complained. Not anymore. The neighbors started acting different, too. Before, they'd whisper about Jake behind his back. "Who's that quiet guy?" they'd say. "Why's he always alone?" Some even sided with Linda, thinking the bird bath was silly. But now, they saw him in a new way. When Jake walked outside, people waved. "Hey, Jake," they'd call, big smiles on their faces. Kids on bikes would shout hi, and old Mr. Thompson across the street even brought him a plate of cookies. Jake wasn't just the quiet guy anymore, he was the one who stopped Linda. He was a hero, and everyone knew it. Justice felt pretty sweet that day. Linda, the HOA queen who loved bossing people around, was gone. Her perfect house sat empty, her perfect flowers drooping a little without her there to fuss over them. Jake's bird bath stood tall, a tiny victory in his yard. He'd won without yelling or fighting, just by being smart and waiting. The neighborhood was peaceful again, and it was all because Jake saw what no one else did. Linda thought she could fool everyone, but Jake made sure she faced the consequences. And that felt really, really good. So, here's the thing: sometimes the person you think is just the quiet guy next door is way more than that. Jake seemed like a regular guy, didn't he? Just someone with a bird bath, sitting on his porch, minding his own business. Linda looked at him and thought, "Oh, he's nothing special." She judged him by that little bird bath, thinking she knew everything about him. But she was so wrong. Jake was holding all the cards, like in a game where you don't show your hand until it's time to win. Linda never saw the real him coming, and that's what tripped her up big time. Maybe that's a lesson for all of us. You can't always tell who someone is just by looking at them. Linda thought she was the boss, the one in charge, with her clipboard and her rules. She messed with Jake because she didn't think he'd fight back. But quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet can mean smart. Quiet can mean strong. Jake proved that. He watched, he waited, and when the moment was right, he showed everyone who he really was: an undercover cop who stopped her sneaky ways. Linda ended up with handcuffs instead of her clipboard, all because she didn't know who she was dealing with. Think about that for a second. How many times do we judge people too fast? Maybe it's the kid at school who doesn't talk much, or the neighbor who keeps to themselves. We might think we've got them figured out, but we don't. People can surprise you. They can have secrets, good ones, like Jake's, or they can be hiding stuff they don't want you to see, like Linda. The trick is, you never know until you take the time to look closer. So maybe next time, don't mess with people you don't really know. You might be the one who ends up shocked. What did you think of this wild ride? Wasn't it crazy how it all turned out? Linda thought she'd win with her 911 calls and her mean notes, but Jake flipped the whole story upside down. I'd love to hear what you think. Drop it in the comments below. And hey, have you ever had a crazy neighbor like Linda? Maybe someone who got mad about something silly, like a bird bath or a loud dog. Tell me your story, I want to hear it. Crazy stuff happens all the time, and I bet you've got a good one. This whole thing with Jake and Linda shows us something cool: the quiet ones can be the strongest. They don't need to yell or show off, they just do their thing and let the truth come out when it's ready. So, keep your eyes open, stay curious, and don't judge too fast. You never know who's got a big surprise waiting. See you in the next story, folks. Stay awesome and keep wondering what's really going on around you.